At 12 a.m., my best friend called me asking, "Can you help me run away from the cops?" "What did you do, Avery?" I sat up in bed already knowing this was serious. "I can't tell you over the phone. Just meet me at the location I sent you in 20 minutes. Bring your car." I grabbed my keys and told my wife I'd be back. The location was a Target parking lot. I found my boy Avery standing behind a dumpster when I pulled up. He dove into my passenger seat and immediately slammed a thick envelope onto my chest. "This is $5,000. Just drive me as far as you can. I trust you." I stared, driving without question. I drove south on the interstate while he fidgeted with the radio, like he was checking for something. Every few seconds, he'd check the mirrors like we were being followed. When I asked again what exactly he did, he just shook his head and asked if I had my phone. "Yeah, it's right here." He grabbed it, rolled down the window, and threw it onto the highway. "I can't be found. They could be tracking us." I was so mad at him, but Avery had this crazy look I never saw before. We'd made it maybe 30 miles when red and blue lights appeared behind us. Avery sank lower in his seat, pulling his jacket up around his face. The siren chirped, and I had no choice but to pull over for the cop. The officer took his time approaching us, while Avery breathed in short, panicked gasps beside me. The flashlight beam hit my face first, then moved to Avery. The cop was young with a thin mustache that looked like Dahmer. He asked for licenses and registration, which I handed over, shaking out of my mind. While he examined them, he kept shining the light on Avery, who wouldn't meet his eyes. "Where you boys headed this time of night?" The officer's tone suggested he already knew we were up to something. I started to answer, but Avery cut me off by pulling out more cash. He leaned across me and stuffed what looked like $2,000 into the officer's shirt pocket. The cop stepped back surprised, but didn't remove the money. "Just a misunderstanding, officer. We're on our way." Avery's voice had switched to smooth and confident, like he was closing a business deal. The cop looked at the bills sticking out of his pocket, then back at us. He handed back our documents without another word and walked to his cruiser. We waited until his taillights disappeared before pulling back onto the highway. I wanted to scream at Avery about bribing a police officer, but he'd already turned on the radio, scanning through static, checking for something. Then the radio finally landed on a clear station, and I learned everything Avery did. A woman's voice filled the car, speaking carefully like she was choosing each word. She identified herself as a local attorney and was coming forward with something that happened tonight. "A couple hours ago, I was date-raped by a man named Avery Jacobson." I looked sideways at Avery, whose face had gone pale in the dashboard light. The woman on the radio kept talking, describing her attacker. 6'1", brown hair, a financial advisor at a firm, every detail matching my best friend next to me. "I'm asking everyone spread the word so we can put this rapist behind bars. This is not his first time doing this." I started to stop the car but felt a gun pressed against my temple. Avery was calm and said, "Don't stop driving." My hands froze on the wheel, and I kept my eyes straight ahead, feeling the cold metal against my skin. The gun stayed there, pressing harder when I tried to swallow, and Avery's breathing got heavy beside me. "Take the next exit and get us off this highway." His voice was different now. Not the friend I knew, but someone dangerous and desperate. I saw the exit sign coming up for County Road 47 and moved into the right lane, slow and careful, like any sudden move might set him off. My whole body was shaking as we curved down the off-ramp into darkness with no streetlights anywhere. The back road stretched out black except for our headlights cutting through, and Avery kept twisting around to check behind us. "Turn left here and kill the high beams." I did what he said, and we crawled along this narrow road with trees pressing in on both sides. Every few seconds, he'd reach over and spin the radio dial, catching fragments of news stations and static. A pair of headlights appeared way behind us, and Avery grabbed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Speed up, but don't look suspicious." The other car turned off at some farm entrance, and he relaxed slightly, but kept the gun where I could feel it. We drove like that for what felt like forever, but was probably an hour with him jumping at every shadow and sound. My brain kept trying to process what I'd heard on the radio and match it with the guy I'd known since college. This was the same Avery who stood as my best man 2 years ago and gave that funny speech about how we met. The same guy who came over every Sunday to watch football and helped me move into my house last spring. We'd been roommates junior year and stayed tight ever since, poker nights and double dates and all that normal friend stuff. But here he was holding a gun on me after that woman said he raped her. The radio crackled again, and he found another news station talking about a manhunt starting for a local financial advisor. They don't know anything yet. He was talking more to himself than me, and his hand was sweaty where it held the gun. "Listen, man, you can't call your wife or anybody else." His eyes were wild in the dashboard light. "If you try anything, I'll know, and this gets way worse for both of us." I thought about my wife, probably pacing around the house wondering where I went in the middle of the night. She'd be calling my dead phone that Avery threw out the window and getting more worried with every ring that went unanswered. "The whole thing with that woman is lies." Avery started talking fast, and his story kept shifting around. We went out for drinks after work, and she was all over me at the bar. Then a minute later, it changed to her inviting him back to her place. "She's trying to shake me down for money because she knows I've got it." But then he said something about her being drunk and not remembering things right. Each version got more desperate and made less sense than the one before. The needle on the gas gauge kept dropping toward E, and I knew we couldn't keep driving these back roads forever. "We need gas soon or we're walking." Avery looked at the gauge and swore under his breath. "Find something remote with no cameras if you can." We passed 2 well-lit stations before finding this sketchy place with half the lights burned out. The pumps looked ancient, and there was just one car parked around the side, probably belonging to whoever was working. Avery shoved some 20s at me and pointed the gun at my chest from under his jacket. "You pump and pay inside, but if you're not back in 5 minutes, I'm gone. And you can explain to the cops why you helped me." The gas pump was one of those old ones where you had to go inside first to turn it on. The door made this loud bell sound when I pushed it open, and the clerk looked up from his phone behind bulletproof glass. He was maybe 19 with bad skin and looked bored out of his mind working the overnight shift. I slid the cash through the slot and asked to put 40 on pump 2, trying to keep my voice normal. "Hey, my phone died. Can I use yours real quick to call my wife?" The kid pointed to this grimy payphone on the wall that I hadn't even noticed. "That still works, but you need quarters." I found some change in my pocket and dialed my home number with shaking fingers, watching the door to make sure Avery couldn't see. My wife picked up on the first ring, sounding scared and angry at the same time. "I'm okay, but I can't explain right now. Just lock the doors and stay inside." She started asking questions, but I hung up and grabbed the gas receipt from the clerk. Back outside, Avery was standing by the car, now watching me walk across the lot. The gun was still in his hand, but hidden under his jacket, and his face looked suspicious as hell. "What took so long?" I held up the receipt and mumbled something about the bathroom being gross. He stared at me for what felt like forever, then got back in the passenger seat. "Drive." I pulled out of the gas station and got back on the dark road, while Avery kept checking behind us every few seconds. He reached over and turned the radio back on, spinning through stations until he found another news channel talking about local stuff. The announcer's voice was serious as he read from what sounded like an official statement about a manhunt for a local man named Avery Jacobson, wanted for sexual assault. They described our car make and model, and even mentioned the color, asking anyone who saw us to call police right away. Avery slammed his fist on the dashboard and switched it off. "We need to ditch this car." He was sweating bad now and kept wiping his face with his sleeve. "Take the next exit and head downtown to my office." I wanted to tell him this was crazy, but the gun was still in his lap and his finger was on the trigger. The exit came up fast and I took it, following his directions through empty streets toward the financial district. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold the wheel steady. The office building was one of those tall glass towers, and Avery directed me into the underground parking garage. He pulled out his keycard and swiped it at the gate, which opened with a mechanical groan. The garage was mostly empty, with just a few cars scattered around under the yellow lights. "Park near the elevator and keep the engine running." He grabbed the gun and pointed it at me one more time. "Don't even think about leaving or I'll find you." Then he jumped out and ran to the elevator, using his keycard again to get it to work. I sat there alone in the dark garage, listening to the engine idle and my own heart pounding. Part of me wanted to just floor it and get out of there, but I knew Avery wasn't lying about finding me. We'd been friends for so long, he knew where I lived, where I worked, where my wife's parents lived. After what felt like forever, but was probably 10 minutes, the elevator dinged and Avery came running out carrying a small metal lockbox and a black laptop bag. He threw them both in the back seat and jumped back in beside me. His face was covered in sweat, and he was breathing hard like he'd run up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. "Go! Get us out of here." I drove back up the ramp and onto the street while Avery twisted around to grab the lockbox from the back. He set it on his lap and spun the combination lock until it clicked open. Inside were stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands and what looked like 4 or 5 passports. He held one up and I could see his photo, but the name was different. Michael something. Another one said James, and another said David. Been planning this for a while in case things went bad. His voice was calmer now, like having the money and fake IDs made him feel safer. "There was this other girl 2 years ago who tried to make trouble for me." He was counting the cash while he talked, not looking at me. "Said I got too rough with her at my place, but my lawyers handled it." He stuffed some bills in his pocket. "Got her to sign an NDA for 50 grand and she went away." My stomach felt sick hearing him talk about another woman like that. This wasn't just one bad night. This was who Avery really was. I looked down at the gun sitting between us and noticed something weird about it. The part where the serial number should be was all scratched up and filed down so you couldn't read it. This wasn't some gun he just happened to have for protection. He'd made it untraceable on purpose. Avery turned the radio back on, and we caught another news report, this time with more details. The woman, still not naming herself publicly, had given a full statement to police, and a detective named Ruby Lawson was now leading the investigation. They were already pulling security footage from Avery's apartment building and interviewing people from the bar where they'd been earlier. Detective Lawson has been in contact with the officer who made a traffic stop earlier tonight. The reporter's voice made my blood run cold. Sources say dashcam footage from that stop is being reviewed, though the officer involved is reportedly not cooperating fully with the request. Avery looked at me and actually smiled. "That cop won't say anything. He took the money." But then the reporter kept going. "Internal Affairs has been notified about potential misconduct, and the officer has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation." The smile dropped off Avery's face real fast. "Drive to that used car lot on Riverside, the one that's always closed." I knew the place he meant. This sketchy lot where people said you could buy cars with no questions asked. It took us 20 minutes to get there, and Avery had me pull around back where it was completely dark. He got out and popped our trunk, pulling out a screwdriver and some other tools I didn't recognize. "Come help me with this." I got out and watched him start removing our license plate with quick, practiced movements. He walked over to another car parked nearby and took its plates off too. Within minutes, he'd switched them, putting the other car's plates on ours. There, now they're looking for the wrong plates. He tossed the tools back in the trunk. Get back in. We need to keep moving. I climbed back into the driver's seat and started the engine, while Avery jumped in beside me, checking his phone for updates. He told me to head toward the east side of town where there was a city park we could rest in for a while. The drive took about 20 minutes through empty streets, and I pulled into the darkest corner of the parking lot near some trees that blocked the streetlights. Avery leaned his seat back and closed his eyes, but kept the gun on his lap with his hand resting on it. I watched him in the dim light and remembered all those times at bars when he'd make gross comments about women that walked by. He'd rate them on their bodies and talk about what he'd do to them if he got the chance. Back then, I just thought he was trying to be funny in that stupid way guys sometimes do. Now those memories made my skin crawl knowing what he was capable of. His phone buzzed on the dashboard and lit up with a news notification that made him sit up fast. The headline said his investment firm had suspended him immediately and was cooperating with police in the investigation. They'd already frozen his company accounts and revoked his building access, which explained why he grabbed that lockbox from his office. More notifications kept coming in about clients pulling their money and partners distancing themselves from the scandal. His whole professional life was falling apart in real time, and I could see the panic growing in his eyes. He suddenly punched the dashboard hard enough to crack the plastic and started yelling that we needed a different car right now. I told him I wasn't going to steal a car for him, and that's when he shoved the gun hard into my ribs. You'll do whatever I tell you to do. The metal was cold through my shirt, and his finger was on the trigger. I suggested we find somewhere to hide instead of stealing a car, and after a minute he agreed, but said it had to be somewhere nobody would think to look. He pulled up his phone and found a 24-hour storage facility about 10 miles away that advertised no questions asked rentals. We drove there in silence except for him giving directions, and when we arrived he had me park around back away from the main office. He went inside alone with cash while I waited in the car, wondering if I should just drive away but knowing he'd hunt me down. He came back with a key to Unit 47, and we drove to the back row where the smallest units were located. The metal door rolled up with a loud screech, and inside was just concrete walls and a musty smell like old water damage. There were some broken pieces of furniture left by previous renters, including a stained couch and a wooden table with 3 legs. Avery dragged the couch to the corner and collapsed on it, saying he needed to sleep for a few hours. Within minutes, he was snoring with the gun still in his hand, but looser now that he was unconscious. I waited another 10 minutes to make sure he was really out, then carefully reached over and slid the gun from his fingers. My hands were shaking as I pressed the release, and the magazine dropped into my palm, heavy with bullets. I looked around for somewhere to hide it and spotted some old boxes stacked against the wall. I shoved the magazine deep behind them where he'd never think to look, then put the empty gun back in his hand. While he slept, I found an old receipt in my pocket and tore off a piece to write on with a pen from the car. I wrote the storage unit number 47 and our license plate number, trying to keep my writing steady. I folded it small and went to the door where I could see a tiny gap at the bottom. I slid the paper underneath, hoping someone would find it and know where we were. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Ruby Lawson was at the gas station reviewing their security cameras with the clerk. The footage clearly showed both our faces when we'd stopped for gas, and the clerk remembered me asking to use their phone. Ruby pulled the phone records and saw the call I'd made to my home lasting only 30 seconds. She took notes about everything, including the direction we'd driven when we left, and the fact that Avery never got out of the car. At the same time, the victim was meeting with her lawyer to schedule a press conference for the next morning at 9 a.m. She was determined to make sure Avery couldn't hurt anyone else, and the hospital had already provided records confirming physical evidence of assault. Her lawyer was building a strong case with witness statements from the bar where they'd been before the attack. Back in the storage unit, Avery suddenly jerked awake and immediately grabbed for his gun, checking it was still there. He noticed something felt different about the weight and popped out the magazine holder, finding it empty. His face went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds, and he slammed me against the concrete wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. "Where is it?" He pressed his forearm against my throat, making it hard to breathe. I told him I threw it in a dumpster at the last place we stopped because I wasn't going to help him hurt anyone. He laughed, but it was bitter and angry, not amused at all. "You think you're better than me now? You're an accomplice to everything, and when they catch us, you're going to prison too." He let go of my throat, and I gasped for air while he paced around the small space. "They'll charge you with aiding and abetting, helping a fugitive escape, destroying evidence, and probably conspiracy too." His voice was calm now, which was somehow worse than when he was yelling. "Your wife will leave you and you'll lose everything just like me, so don't act all high and mighty." He kicked the broken table leg, sending it spinning across the floor. I stood there rubbing my throat while Avery grabbed his stuff and said we needed to leave right now before someone found us here. We rolled down the metal door and got back in the car, me driving again with Avery watching every direction at once. As I backed out of the narrow space between units, a patrol car turned into the storage facility entrance, and I jerked the wheel hard to the right, scraping the bumper against a concrete post with a horrible grinding sound. The cop drove past without stopping, but we both sat there shaking for a good minute before I could get my hands steady enough to drive. Avery kept checking behind us as we pulled onto the main road, and I told him we needed help from someone who knew the law because we were just making things worse. He thought about it, then agreed, but said I couldn't call anyone he didn't approve first. We found an old diner about 20 minutes away with a payphone inside, and Avery stood right next to me while I dropped quarters into the slot. I'd grabbed a business card from my wallet for Liam Vogel, a defense lawyer who'd helped my cousin with a DUI last year. When Liam answered, I explained real careful that my friend and I were in some trouble and needed advice about turning ourselves in safely. You need to get away from him immediately, Liam said after I gave him the basics without using Avery's name. I can arrange a safe surrender, but only if you come alone right now. Avery must have heard something in my voice because he grabbed the card from my hand and saw Vogel's name and title. His face went dark, and he slammed me hard into the wall, my shoulder hitting the wood paneling with a crack that left instant pain shooting down my arm. You trying to set me up? He dragged me out the back door while the diner staff just watched, too scared to help. Meanwhile, that reporter, Tariq Green, had gotten security footage from the gas station and posted it on social media showing our car with the swapped plates clear as day. Within an hour, tips were flooding in from people who thought they'd seen us at different places around town. Avery's phone kept buzzing with notifications, and when he checked it, his face got even more pale. Back in the car, Avery started talking fast about how he knew that cop would take the money because he'd done it before with other officers when clients got pulled over drunk. Half the cops in this county will take cash to look the other way, he said, like it was no big deal. The corruption went deeper than just tonight, and I felt sick knowing how many times he'd probably bought his way out of trouble. We went back to the storage unit to grab the rest of his stuff, but when Avery tried to burn some papers in a metal trash can, the smoke set off the sprinkler system. Water started spraying everywhere, soaking us both in seconds as we grabbed what we could and ran out looking exactly like the desperate criminals we'd become. The whole place would have cameras, and now we'd left even more evidence behind. I told Avery maybe we should meet with Liam Vogel in person, because lawyers always had cash for bail, and maybe he could help us disappear properly. It was a total lie, but Avery was getting desperate enough to believe anything that sounded like escape. If this is a trap, I'll make sure you go down for everything too, he said, but agreed to the meeting. While we were planning this, Detective Lawson was at the police station interviewing that young cop who'd taken Avery's bribe. The officer had held out for hours, but finally admitted taking the $2,000 when they showed him the dashcam footage that caught everything. Internal Affairs suspended him immediately and pulled all his recent stops to check for other bribes. The victim attorney was getting ready for her press conference scheduled for that morning, going over her statement with her lawyer one more time. When 9 a.m. came, she stood at the podium looking tired but determined, speaking in a calm, clear voice about what Avery had done to her. She didn't cry or yell, just laid out the facts of how he drugged her drink at the bar and what happened after. Most people watching online expressed support and anger, though some questioned why she'd waited hours to report it. The conference ended with her lawyer announcing they had physical evidence from the hospital and witness statements from the bar staff who'd seen Avery putting something in her drink. Everything was falling apart for Avery, and he knew it, his phone showing more notifications about the press conference and people sharing her story everywhere. He threw his phone against the dashboard hard enough to crack the screen and started yelling about how she was lying and trying to ruin his life over nothing. But I could see the truth in how his hands shook and how he couldn't look at me when he talked about that night. We were running out of places to hide, and both of us knew it was only a matter of time before they found us. My phone started buzzing in the storage unit, even though Avery had thrown it out the window hours ago. Then I remembered I'd grabbed his broken one from the dashboard. The screen showed 17 missed calls from my wife, and when I listened to the voicemail, her voice was shaking as she said the cops had come to our house asking where I was. She'd hired Liam Vogel to represent me, and he wanted to meet us at a diner off Route 9 to work out a safe surrender. Avery heard the message playing, and his face got hard as he grabbed the phone and called the number back, pretending to be me while asking Vogel exactly where this diner was. After hanging up, Avery said we'd go, but only to get money from the lawyer for a real escape, not to turn ourselves in. We drove to the diner in our beat-up car with the swapped plates, both of us looking like we hadn't slept in days, which was true. The parking lot had maybe 6 cars, including 2 plain sedans that looked way too clean and had those little antennas on the back that unmarked cop cars always have. Avery spotted them right away and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, dragging me back before we even got to the door. "It's a setup," he said, and pulled me around the side of the building where we could see through the window. Liam was sitting at a booth checking his watch, and there were 2 guys in baseball caps at the counter who kept looking at the door every few seconds. We ran back to the car, but Avery was so mad he started hitting the steering wheel and yelling about how I'd betrayed him by calling the lawyer. I told him it was my wife who called, not me, but he wasn't listening anymore. He pulled out the gun and waved it at me while driving way too fast down the back roads behind the diner. I grabbed for the gun because I was tired of being scared, and we fought over it while the car swerved all over the road. Avery pulled the trigger during our struggle, but nothing happened. Just a click, because I'd taken out the magazine back at the storage unit. The gun clicking empty made him even more mad, and he lost control of the wheel, sending us straight into a metal guardrail at maybe 40 miles an hour. The airbags went off and my face felt like someone had punched me hard, plus my ears were ringing from the impact. Avery's nose was bleeding bad, and he kept touching it, then looking at the blood on his fingers like he couldn't believe it. We got out of the wrecked car and started running because we could already hear sirens coming from somewhere close. My left ankle twisted hard when I stepped in a pothole in the dark, and pain shot up my whole leg, but Avery grabbed my arm and pulled me along anyway. We ran through some woods and came out at this huge industrial area with warehouses and loading docks everywhere. Most of the buildings were dark, but one had a security guard booth with a light on, and we ducked behind a dumpster to avoid being seen. Avery found a side door to one of the warehouses that wasn't locked right, and we slipped inside just as a security guard walked by doing his rounds. The guard must have seen the door closing because he started yelling and pulling out his radio to call 911 about a break-in. Inside the warehouse, it was pitch black except for some emergency exit signs, and we stumbled around trying to find somewhere to hide. There were metal shipping containers stacked up like giant blocks, and we squeezed between two of them just as red and blue lights started flashing through the windows. More and more sirens kept coming until it sounded like every cop in the county was outside. Then this woman's voice came over a loudspeaker saying she was Detective Lawson and they had the building surrounded, so we should come out with our hands up. She kept talking about how nobody had to get hurt, and they just wanted to resolve this peacefully. But Avery was pacing back and forth in our hiding spot like a trapped animal. "This is all your fault," he kept saying to me, his voice getting louder even though I kept telling him to be quiet. The negotiator on the loudspeaker said they knew we were inside and had all night to wait us out, so we might as well surrender now. Avery suddenly shoved me hard toward a side exit door, and when I stumbled out into the open, cops were on me in seconds. They pushed me down on the concrete and cuffed my hands behind my back while I kept saying I surrendered and wasn't resisting. Through all the yelling and chaos, I saw Avery slip out the back of the warehouse and disappear into the darkness between buildings. The cops dragged me to a police car, and I actually felt relief even with the handcuffs cutting into my wrists, because at least this nightmare was ending for me. They took me to the station and put me in a small room with a camera in the corner and a metal table bolted to the floor. Liam Vogel showed up about an hour later looking tired but professional in his suit, and he told me not to say anything until he'd talked to the prosecutor. Detective Lawson came in carrying a thick folder and sat down across from us, her face showing she'd been up all night too. She said they had me on camera at multiple locations and wanted to hear my side of everything that had happened. Liam nodded at me to go ahead, so I started from the beginning, telling her about Avery's call and the Target parking lot and the envelope with $5,000. I explained how I didn't know about the rape at first, just thought he was in some kind of trouble, but then heard it on the radio after we'd already bribed that cop. Lawson wrote everything down and asked specific questions about times and places, especially about the gun and whether I'd known Avery had it before he pulled it on me. When I got to the part about removing the magazine, she looked surprised and wrote something in big letters on her notepad. She left the room for a while and came back with a laptop that she turned toward me, showing dashcam footage from that traffic stop. The video was clear as day, showing our faces, the money being stuffed in the cop's pocket, and both our license plates before and after Avery switched them. "This is you and Avery Jacobson bribing a police officer," she said, like it wasn't even a question. The footage made it impossible to deny anything, and Lawson started listing all the charges they could file against me. Accessory after the fact to rape, bribing an officer, tampering with evidence, and maybe even kidnapping since Avery had held me at gunpoint. Liam started arguing that I was a victim too, but Lawson cut him off and said being scared didn't excuse helping a rapist escape for 2 days. She showed me photos they'd found on Avery's phone from that night at the bar, including one where you could see him dropping something into a woman's drink when she wasn't looking. The evidence against him was solid, and they just needed to catch him, which meant they needed me to help since I knew him better than anyone. Liam stood up and asked to speak with the prosecutor right away about my situation. Detective Lawson made a phone call, and 20 minutes later, a woman in a dark suit walked in carrying more folders. She sat down and looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. Liam started explaining how I'd been held at gunpoint the whole time and tried to leave evidence for the police to find. He pointed out the receipt paper I'd slipped under the storage unit door and how I'd removed the gun's magazine to protect myself. The prosecutor listened without changing her expression while writing notes on a yellow legal pad. She said they might consider a cooperation agreement, but only if I helped them catch Avery before he hurt someone else. I nodded so fast my neck hurt because anything was better than going to prison for helping a rapist escape. They brought in recording equipment and had me call every number I knew for Avery, but they all went straight to voicemail. 2 hours passed with them coaching me on what to say if he contacted me when my phone suddenly rang from an unknown number. Detective Lawson motioned for me to answer while she put on headphones to listen in. It was Avery, and his voice sounded different, harder and meaner than I'd ever heard it. He said I was a traitor for turning myself in and that he knew where my wife worked. My hands started shaking, but Lawson held up a sign that said, "Keep him talking." I told Avery I was sorry, and that the cops had grabbed me, but I didn't tell them anything important. He laughed and said he saw the news report about me being in custody, so he knew I was lying. I asked where he was and if he needed help, but he just kept talking about how I'd ruined everything. The call lasted maybe 3 minutes before he hung up, and Lawson said they'd traced it to a cell tower on the east side of town. She wanted me to meet with Avery wearing a wire to get him admitting to the rape on tape. My stomach turned over at the thought of seeing him again, but I knew this was my only shot at avoiding serious jail time. Liam negotiated the terms while I sat there sweating through my shirt. They'd drop most charges if I got Avery on tape confessing and helped with the arrest. The next morning, they brought me back to the station where technicians taped a tiny recorder to my back under my shirt. Lawson and Liam spent an hour coaching me on what questions to ask and how to get him talking about that night. I called Avery from a burner phone they gave me and told him I had $10,000 in cash and a car with clean plates. He was quiet for a long time before agreeing to meet at a parking garage downtown at 8 that night. The cops set up surveillance at every exit and had undercover officers stationed throughout the building. I sat in my car on the third level waiting and feeling like I might throw up from nerves. Avery finally showed up driving some beat-up sedan I'd never seen before. He'd lost weight in just a few days, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. His eyes darted around, checking every shadow and corner before he got in my passenger seat. He immediately started patting me down for weapons, checking my pockets and waistband while I held my breath. His hands passed right over the wire taped between my shoulder blades without noticing it. He looked terrible up close with dark circles under his eyes and stubble covering his usually clean-shaven face. I handed him the envelope of cash, which was really just newspaper with real bills on top. He counted it quickly, then asked about the car, and I pointed to a rental the cops had provided. He relaxed a little and leaned back in the seat like old times, except nothing about this felt normal. I asked him what really happened that night with the woman attorney. He shrugged and said they'd been drinking at the bar and things got rough when they went back to her place. He claimed she was into it at first, but changed her mind later and tried to shake him down for money. I kept my voice steady and asked if he'd done anything to her drink. He smiled in this gross way and said maybe he helped her relax a little, but that wasn't a crime. Then I asked about the cop we'd bribed, and he admitted giving him $2,000 to look the other way. He said cops in this town were all corrupt anyway, and would do anything for the right price. He was getting comfortable now, talking more freely about how the woman was making everything up for attention. He used the word sex instead of rape, and said she'd wanted it until she found out he wasn't going to leave his fiancée for her. Every word made me feel sicker, but I kept nodding and acting like I understood. He talked about other women too, hinting at things he'd done before without saying it directly. I asked if he was scared about getting caught, and he said they'd never find him once he got to Mexico. He had it all planned out with fake documents and a contact who'd help him cross the border. That's when the police moved in from all directions with guns drawn and voices yelling for him to show his hands. Avery's face went from confident to panicked in half a second as he reached for his waistband. He pulled out the gun and pointed it at the nearest officer, not knowing I'd removed the bullets days ago. The gun clicked uselessly as he pulled the trigger, and 3 cops tackled him to the concrete. They had him cuffed and searched within seconds while he screamed that I'd set him up. More officers surrounded us and pulled me out of the car with my hands up, even though I wasn't resisting. Avery kept yelling my name and calling me a snitch as they dragged him to a police car. His face was red and twisted with rage, nothing like the friend I'd known for 15 years. They arrested him on multiple charges, including rape, bribery, kidnapping, and attempted assault on an officer. As they drove him away, he stared at me through the back window with pure hate in his eyes. I knew right then that our friendship had been dead long before tonight. The cops arrested me too, but Liam had already arranged bail, and I was released within hours. They gave me an ankle monitor and said I couldn't leave the county while the case was pending. I had to check in with a probation officer every week and submit to drug tests, even though I'd never used anything. The next day, Detective Lawson called to tell me the victim wanted to meet with her about the arrest. The woman attorney was exhausted, but relieved that Avery would finally face justice for what he'd done. Lawson said there were other victims too who might come forward now that he was in custody. 3 days later, the news broke that the officer who took Avery's bribe got suspended pending investigation. Internal Affairs pulled his dashcam footage and found 17 other traffic stops where money changed hands, but no tickets got written. They arrested him at his house while his kids watched from the window. The department fired him that same afternoon, and the district attorney filed charges for accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. His mugshot showed a broken man who'd thrown away 15 years on the force for quick cash. My wife called Liam and said she wanted to meet about our marriage. She'd been staying at her mother's place since my arrest and wouldn't answer my texts. We sat in Liam's conference room while she laid out her terms. I had to take full responsibility for helping Avery escape, no excuses about the gun or being scared. I had to get therapy to figure out why I'd choose loyalty to him over doing the right thing. She wanted me to understand how I'd put her through hell wondering if I was dead or arrested, or helping a rapist get away. If I couldn't do those things, she'd file for divorce. I agreed to everything because losing her would destroy me worse than any jail time. 2 weeks later, I stood in court while the judge read the charges. Liam had worked out a deal where I'd plead guilty to accessory after the fact in exchange for my full cooperation. The prosecutor recommended 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. The judge asked if I understood what I was admitting to, and I said yes. She sentenced me to exactly what the prosecutor asked for, plus mandatory check-ins with a probation officer. I had to pay $5,000 in fines and couldn't leave the state without permission. Meanwhile, Avery sat in county jail with no bail after the judge called him a flight risk and danger to the community. The news stopped covering the story after a few weeks, but the victim attorney kept doing interviews about assault in the justice system. She started a foundation to help other victims come forward and get legal help. I watched one interview where she talked about the trauma of that night and how my helping him escape made everything worse. She was strong and composed, but you could see the pain in her eyes. I wrote her a letter through her lawyer saying I was sorry for my role in prolonging her suffering. I didn't ask for forgiveness or try to explain myself. I just wanted her to know I took responsibility for the harm I caused. Her lawyer sent back a brief note saying she received it, but didn't want any further contact. My sister Jane found me a therapist who specialized in moral injury and trauma. Dr. Sanchez had worked with veterans who'd done things in war they couldn't live with. We met every week in her office that smelled like vanilla candles. She made me examine every choice I made that night, starting with answering Avery's call. We talked about how I'd ignored warning signs for years because I didn't want to believe my best friend could hurt women. She helped me see how my definition of loyalty was actually enabling dangerous behavior. We worked through why I froze when he pulled the gun instead of crashing the car or fighting back. 6 months after that night in the Target parking lot, Avery's trial started. The prosecutor called me as a witness, and I spent 3 hours on the stand describing everything that happened. Avery sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit staring at me with dead eyes. His lawyer tried to make me look like a liar who turned on his friend to save himself. I answered every question honestly, even when it made me look terrible. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 15 years with no chance of parole for 8. When they let him out in shackles, he turned and mouthed something at me that looked like a threat. I started rebuilding my life one piece at a time. My wife moved back home after I'd been in therapy for 3 months, and we started couples counseling. I lost my job because of the criminal record, but found work at a warehouse loading trucks. The pay sucked, but honest work felt good after everything. I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter doing maintenance and repairs. The director knew my story and thought I could be an example of someone who learned from terrible choices. Some of the women there had partners who reminded me of Avery, charming on the outside but violent when they didn't get their way. I fixed broken doors and windows while listening to their stories. The gun Avery pressed to my head that night had opened my eyes to violence I'd been blind to for years. Now I used that knowledge to help others spot the red flags I'd ignored. Every Tuesday, I attended a support group for people who'd enabled abusers. We sat in a circle at the community center sharing our guilt and working towards something better. I'd never forget what I did or stop regretting it, but maybe I could use it to prevent someone else from making the same mistake. That's a wrap for now. Thanks for just hanging out and exploring all these little details with me. Until next time, subscribe for more content like this.